The engines cut out before anyone could scream. Not slowly, not politely. They died mid-breath, a hard, mechanical silence that slammed into the cabin like a verdict. Glasses rattled. A baby gasped and then went quiet. Somewhere up front, a man laughed once, sharp and ugly, as if he thought the plane itself had flinched for him. Alyssa Grant stood frozen in the aisle. Her fingers were still wrapped around the strap of a battered duffel bag. The fabric bit into her palm. She hadn't noticed the pain until the silence arrived and gave her nothing else to hear. No engine hum, no announcements, just the low hiss of recycled air and the sound of people realizing something was wrong. Seat 1. A was 3 steps in front of her, occupied. Richard Coleman leaned back in it like it had been molded to his spine. Navy suit, silver hair combed back with care. A tumbler of whiskey balanced in his hand, ice tapping the glass as he lifted it in a small, private toast to no one. His mouth curved into a smirk that never reached his eyes, the kind of smile that assumed the world would bend before anyone bothered to ask it to. He didn't look at Alyssa. He didn't need to. He had already decided who she was. Alyssa felt the heat climb the back of her neck, slow and controlled. Not panic, not fear. Something older. Something learned. The familiar burn of being weighed, measured, and dismissed without a single word exchanged. Around them, first class held its breath. Leather seats, muted lighting, the soft clink of glassware frozen mid-motion. A woman in 2. A lowered her phone an inch, screen still glowing, pretending she hadn't been recording the moment the engines died. A man in 2B stared straight ahead, jaw tight, fingers moving under his jacket as if counting something invisible. Alyssa cleared her throat. The sound felt too small. "Excuse me," she said. Richard raised one finger without turning his head. Not now. He finished whatever message he was typing on his tablet, hit send, then finally looked up. His eyes swept over her hoodie, the faded grey fabric pulled low, the scuffed sneakers, the duffel bag that had seen too many terminals and too few upgrades. Disgust flickered. Quick. Practiced. "Yes," he said. "Can I help you?" His voice carried. Calm. Confident. The voice of a man who had never been told no in a room like this. "I believe you're in my seat," Alyssa said. Her tone was steady. Measured. Seat 1, A. For a beat, Richard just stared at her. Then he laughed. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of laugh meant to instruct others on how to see the world. "That's funny," he said. "Economy is that way." He gestured with his glass towards the back of the plane, the ice clinking again. "Happens all the time." Alyssa didn't move. She glanced down at her phone, the screen still lit with her boarding pass. 1A. Her name. Clear. Undeniable. "I'm not mistaken," she said. "If you could check yours, I'd appreciate it." The smile vanished from Richard's face, replaced by irritation, by the look of a man being inconvenienced by furniture that had started talking. He sighed, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. set the glass down with a deliberate clatter. "Listen," he said, leaning back, spreading his knees. "I'm a Platinum Diamond member. I always sit here. Always. I don't know how you got past the gate, but this isn't your section." He glanced toward the front. "Natalie." The name cracked through the cabin like a command. Natalie Brooks appeared almost instantly, her heels quiet on the carpet, her smile already fixed in place. Early 40s, perfect posture, lipstick untouched. She took in the scene in half a second and made a decision before anyone spoke. "Yes, Mr. Coleman?" she asked, warmth pouring from every syllable. Richard gestured at Alyssa with his chin. "This person seems confused." Natalie turned. Her eyes landed on Alyssa's hoodie. Stayed there a fraction too long. Dropped to the duffel bag. Then lifted back up, polite and cool. "Ma'am," she said, "I need to see your boarding pass." Alyssa held out her phone. Natalie glanced at it. Just a glance. Enough to know it was real. Enough to know exactly what she was choosing to ignore. She didn't scan it. Didn't call the gate. Didn't ask a single follow-up question. "There appears to be a double booking," Natalie said smoothly. "That's not possible," Alyssa replied. "I booked this seat weeks ago." "Well," Natalie said, her tone tightening, the smile thinning into something brittle, "Mr. Coleman is already seated, and we need to close the doors." The engines were still dead. No one mentioned that. "I paid for that seat," Alyssa said. Her voice dropped. Not louder. "Lower." "I'm not moving." Richard chuckled, picked up his glass again. "Come on, sweetheart. It's just a chair." Alyssa looked at him, then at Natalie, then around the cabin, faces averted, phones hidden, the quiet complicity of comfort. She thought of the rain hammering the glass at Chicago O'Hare, thought of the week she'd just survived, thought of the code she'd written at 3 a.m. years ago, hunched over a laptop that overheated if you breathed on it wrong. She exhaled. "Which seat?" she asked. Natalie blinked. "Pardon?" "You're moving me," Alyssa said. "Which seat?" Natalie pointed toward the curtain. 34B, exit row, extra legroom." Richard raised his glass in a mock salute. "See? Problem solved." Alyssa nodded once. She stepped past Natalie, past the curtain, past the soft outrage and the quieter relief. Walked the long aisle to the back like a sentence being carried out. She slid into 34B, wedged between a sleeping man and an older woman knitting with trembling hands. The older woman looked at her, eyes kind and tired. "They bumped you," she said softly. Not a question. Alyssa buckled her seatbelt. Something like that. The woman offered her a peppermint. For the nerves. Alyssa took it, unwrapped it slowly. The engine stayed silent. She unlocked her phone. Not messages. Not social media. A blue icon pulsed on the screen. In first class, Richard Coleman leaned back and smiled to himself, convinced the matter was finished. Convinced the plane, like everything else, would move when he told it to. He had no idea the woman he'd just sent to the back was the reason it ever moved at all. Alyssa let the peppermint dissolve without chewing. The sharp sweetness cut through the stale cabin air, grounding her in the physical world. The seat fabric scratched the back of her thighs. The armrest pressed into her ribs. 34B was narrow, apologetic, designed to remind you of your place. She stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused, while the plane sat immobile on the tarmac like a restrained animal. Around her, impatience began to ripple. A man 2 rows up tugged off his headphones. "Why aren't we moving?" he muttered, loud enough to be heard, as if irritation itself might jump-start the engines. A flight attendant pushed past with a tight smile, her perfume leaving a brief chemical wake. The older woman beside Alyssa, Helen, clicked her knitting needles too fast, hands betraying the calm her face tried to hold. Alyssa's phone vibrated once in her palm. She didn't look at it. She knew exactly what it was. Up front, Natalie Brooks leaned into the galley counter, fingers wrapped around the edge as if it might slide away. She kept her eyes on the cockpit door. She'd seen the captain's face when he stepped out moments ago, the way his confidence faltered, the way his mouth tightened before he said nothing and disappeared back inside. Natalie told herself it was routine, a software hiccup. Weather delays happened all the time. Still, her shoulders refused to relax. In seat 1A, Richard Coleman drained his glass and signaled for another. "Unbelievable," he said to no one in particular. "I've got a dinner in Mayfair tonight. They'd better not make me miss it." The replacement flight attendant pawed with shaking hands. "Of course, sir." Richard glanced toward the back, past the curtain, as if checking that the problem had stayed where he put it. His smile returned. Thin, satisfied. In 34B, Alyssa finally unlocked her phone. The blue interface bloomed softly against the dim cabin light. Clean lines, no branding, no wasted motion. She rested the phone on her thigh, shielded by her forearm, and read the first alert. Flight 4, 8-2. Status, pending ground clearance. License handshake interrupted. She scrolled. Secondary alert followed, then a third, each one stacked neatly, unemotional, factual. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do when an anomaly appeared. No drama, no judgment, just response. Helen leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You okay, dear?" Alyssa nodded. "Yes. You don't look okay." Alyssa considered that. "I am," she said. "I just don't like being rushed when things matter." Helen studied her for a moment, then nodded as if she understood more than Alyssa expected. "Neither do I." The intercom chimed, not the usual cheerful pre-departure tone. This one was flat, uncertain. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain began, his voice carefully neutral. "This is Captain Reynolds. We're experiencing a minor technical issue with our flight systems. We're coordinating with ground operations now. Please remain seated." A collective groan rolled through the cabin. Someone laughed nervously. Someone swore under their breath. Phones came out. Screens lit up. Messages flew to bosses and spouses and waiting cars. Alyssa felt the vibration again. This time she read it. David Lynn, Chief Technology Officer. One line, stark against the blue. "Did you revoke a license on an active commercial flight?" She exhaled slowly. Typed back with her thumb. "Yes." 3 dots appeared immediately. Vanished. Reappeared. "That's a level 5 action, Alyssa. Full lockout. Ops is lighting up. FAA dashboard just went red. She glanced toward the front, imagining the cockpit screens flashing unfamiliar warnings, the maintenance engineers scrambling through protocols written years ago, the quiet panic that comes when systems don't behave as promised. She typed again. The hardware integrity is compromised. There was a pause this time. Longer. Respectful. Compromised how? Alyssa lifted her eyes, letting them drift over the backs of seats, the sagging headrests, the people who had no idea how close they were to the hidden seams of the world they trusted. Corporate asset theft. She typed, active, on board. She locked the phone and slid it back into her pocket. The engines remained silent. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The air grew thick, heavy with recycled breath and frustration. A baby began to cry somewhere near the wing. The man beside Alyssa woke, blinking, disoriented. Did we take off? No, Helen said gently. Oh. He slumped back, disappointed. In first class, Richard's patience snapped. This is ridiculous, he barked. Natalie, what's happening? Natalie forced a smile. Just a brief delay, sir. Well, it's costing me money. She nodded. Of course. Her eyes flicked again to the cockpit. The intercom chimed a second time. The captain's voice had changed, stripped of its practiced ease. The reset didn't resolve the issue, he said. We're consulting with maintenance and federal authorities. Thank you for your patience. Federal authorities. The words landed hard. Murmurs surged. Heads turned. Fear edged into the irritation now, sharper, more focused. Alyssa sat very still. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't need to look to know David was calling. She declined it. Around her, life pressed on in small human ways. Helen dropped a stitch and cursed softly. The flight attendant offered warm water no one wanted. A man across the aisle began a whispered argument with his wife about whether they should deplane if given the option. No one looked at Alyssa. That was fine. The curtain at the front whipped open suddenly. Natalie marched down the aisle, heels striking harder now, composure cracking at the edges. She was headed for the rear galley, jaw tight, eyes bright with something like fear. As she passed row 34, her gaze snagged. Alyssa looked up at the exact same moment. Their eyes met. Natalie slowed. Just a fraction. Confusion crossed her face, followed by something else. A flicker of doubt. The woman in the hoodie wasn't texting frantically, wasn't complaining, wasn't panicking. She looked like she was waiting. Natalie turned away, unsettled, and hurried on. The plane shuddered slightly as a vehicle approached outside. Blue light flashed through the windows, briefly painting the cabin in cold color. Helen pressed her lips together. Police, she whispered. I know, Alyssa said. The intercom crackled again, this time without pleasantries. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain said, voice grave now. We've been instructed to return to the gate. Authorities will be boarding the aircraft to address a security matter. Please remain seated. Security matter. The side door near the front opened with a thud. Wind and rain rushed in, carrying the smell of wet concrete and jet fuel. 2 uniformed officers climbed aboard, followed by a man in a dark coat, eyes sharp, movements efficient. Richard stood up immediately. "About time," he said loudly. "Get whoever caused this off my plane." The man in the dark coat stopped, scanned the cabin, then spoke. "We're looking for Alyssa Grant." The name cut through the noise like a blade. Natalie froze. Heads turned. Helen inhaled sharply. Alyssa unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood, and for the first time since the engines died, the cabin truly went silent. The aisle felt narrower as Alyssa stepped into it. Every eye followed her. Curiosity sharpened into something closer to alarm. The man in the dark coat watched her approach without blinking, his expression unreadable, the kind of face trained to absorb chaos without reflecting it back. "Yes," Alyssa said, before anyone else could speak. Her voice carried easily. Calm, controlled. "That's me." Natalie's mouth opened, closed. Her hand drifted to the back of a seat, as if she needed to hold on to something solid. The officer nearest the door glanced at the man in the coat. A subtle nod passed between them. "Ma'am," the man said, stepping forward. "I'm Special Agent Thomas Reed. We need to ask you a few questions." Richard Coleman laughed again, loud and brittle. "This is unbelievable," he said, addressing the cabin like an audience. "I told you someone was up to something." A murmur rippled through first class. Phones rose higher now. No one bothered to hide it anymore. Alyssa didn't look at Richard. "Of course," she said to the agent. "Where would you like to speak?" Agent Reed hesitated. "Just a beat." Then his eyes flicked toward the cockpit, then back to her. "Up front," he said. "If you don't mind." She nodded once and turned toward the front of the plane. The walk felt different this time. Passengers leaned back to make space, eyes wide, tracking her like a slow procession. The man who had slept through most of the delay stared openly now, confusion creasing his brow. Helen reached out and squeezed Alyssa's hand as she passed. "Whatever it is," Helen whispered, "don't let them scare you." Alyssa gave her a small smile. "They won't." Behind her, Natalie followed, her steps uneven, breath shallow. She looked like someone replaying a moment over and over, searching for the exact second where everything went wrong. They reached the front galley. The air there was colder, tighter. The cockpit door stood open now, the captain visible inside, his hands braced on the console as if the aircraft itself might slip away if he let go. Agent Reed stopped and turned. "Ms. Grant," he said, lowering his voice. "Do you understand why we're here?" Alyssa met his gaze. "Yes." He raised an eyebrow. "You do?" "Yes," she said. "Because the authorization for this aircraft was revoked." The captain stiffened. Reed's eyes sharpened. "By whom?" Alyssa didn't answer immediately. She glanced past him, toward the cabin, toward the rows of people who had been watching her all morning without seeing her. "By the license holder," she said. Silence snapped tight. Natalie swallowed audibly. "That's not funny," she said, forcing a laugh that died halfway out of her throat. "This is serious." "It is," Alyssa replied. She turned back to Reed. "You received a level 5 ground stop alert. That only triggers under specific conditions. Reed studied her, then pulled a tablet from inside his coat. The screen glowed, reflected faintly in his eyes. Unauthorized access, he read aloud. Asset misuse. Potential corporate piracy. He looked up. Those are your words. Yes. Richard's voice cut in from behind the curtain. This is insane. She's just some passenger you bumped from first class. Natalie flinched at the word bumped. Alyssa turned slowly. For the first time, she looked directly at Richard Coleman. You didn't steal a seat, she said. Not loud, not angry. You stole a licensed asset. Richard scoffed. I paid for my ticket. You paid for transportation, Alyssa said. Not control. Agent Reed's fingers paused over the tablet. Ms. Grant, he said carefully. Are you telling me you have the authority to ground this aircraft? Yes. The word landed heavy. Natalie shook her head. No. No, that's not possible. She was in a hoodie. She didn't even have a carry-on suitable for... Stop, Reed said sharply. Natalie went silent. Reed looked back at Alyssa. What is your role, Ms. Grant? Alyssa inhaled. Slow, deliberate. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Systems, she said. We hold the active software license governing this aircraft's navigation handshake, dispatch authorization, and real-time compliance monitoring. The captain stepped fully out of the cockpit now. You're telling me, he said, voice tight, that my plane is sitting here because of you. Alyssa met his eyes. Your plane is sitting here because your crew removed me from my assigned seat after verifying my identity and ticket in violation of the licensing agreement you operate under. The captain stared at her. Then he looked at Natalie. Natalie's face drained of color. I was trying to de-escalate, she said weakly. Mr. Coleman is a high-status passenger. He's very influential. Reed turned his tablet so she could see the screen. Influential enough to override a software license worth billions? Natalie said nothing. From first class, Richard pushed through the curtain, his patience finally snapping. This is absurd, he said, pointing at Alyssa. You can't seriously be entertaining this. I want her off this plane. Reed didn't look at him. Sir, please return to your seat. Do you know who I am? Yes, Reed said, finally turning. You're the passenger currently under review for potential financial crimes flagged during this delay. Richard's mouth opened. Closed. What? Reed's voice was calm, almost polite. Your name triggered an alert when we ran the manifest during the lockdown. Securities and Exchange Commission, wire fraud, embezzlement, pending indictment. The cabin gasped as one. Richard laughed, too loudly. That's ridiculous. It's not, Reed said. And it appears you were attempting to leave the jurisdiction. Richard looked around wildly. This is because of her, he spat. She's abusing her power. Alyssa stepped forward, stopping an arm's length away from him. I didn't abuse anything, she said. I enforced a contract. She turned back to Reed. I want my seat restored. I want him removed. And I want a formal acknowledgement that I was displaced without cause. Reed nodded once. That can be arranged. Natalie made a strangled sound. Please, she said, voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Alyssa looked at her. Really looked. You didn't check, she said. That's worse. Reed turned to the officers. Escort Ms. Grant to the front, then remove Mr. Coleman. The officers moved. As Alyssa walked back toward first class, the cabin shifted. People stood. Some clapped hesitantly, then louder. A man started a slow clap that spread, awkward and unstoppable. Richard backed away, face flushed, fury collapsing into panic. You can't do this, he shouted, as hands closed around his arms. I have connections. Alyssa passed him without stopping. You had a boarding pass, she said quietly. You just had to read it. She reached seat 1A. The spilled whiskey still darkened the carpet. The pillow lay crumpled. The seat waited. Behind her, handcuffs clicked shut. Alyssa turned and sat down. The engines remained silent, but the balance of power had already shifted. The cabin didn't celebrate right away. Applause died down into a restless hush, the kind that comes after something irreversible has happened, and no one is sure what the next rule is. Alyssa sat still in seat 1A, hands folded in her lap, feeling the subtle give of the leather beneath her, the quiet luxury she'd paid for and been denied. The smell of whiskey lingered, sharp and faintly sour. It wasn't victory, she felt. It was alignment. Things clicking back into the place they should have been all along. Agent Reed leaned in slightly. Ms. Grant, he said, keeping his voice low, before we proceed any further, we need to restore operational clearance. The aircraft can't move until your system releases the lock. Alyssa nodded. I understand. She didn't reach for her phone yet. Across the aisle, a man in a charcoal blazer stared at her as if he'd just realized the ground had rules he'd never bothered to read. In 2A, the woman who'd been filming lowered her phone, then raised it again, undecided about which version of history she was supposed to preserve. The captain stood near the cockpit, shoulders squared, trying to look like a man still in command of his ship. Natalie Brooks hovered near the galley, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles shone. Her eyes kept darting between Alyssa and the floor, as if one of them might accuse her if she looked too long. The officers guided Richard Coleman toward the door. He resisted at first, loudly, indignantly, then quieter as the reality of steel cuffs and federal badges pressed in. His loafers scuffed the carpet. He called out names that meant nothing to the people holding him. He tried to catch Alyssa's eye. She didn't give it to him. When the door closed behind him, the cabin exhaled. Agent Reed straightened. Captain, he said, once Ms. Grant clears the system, you'll be free to taxi. The captain nodded, then turned to Alyssa. Ms. Grant, he said, carefully respectful now. On behalf of the crew, I apologize for the inconvenience. Alyssa met his gaze. Thank you, she said. I'd also appreciate a written acknowledgement from the airline. He blinked. Of course. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The blue interface lit her face in cool light. She unlocked it with a thumbprint, the motion smooth, practiced. The app opened without ceremony. No fireworks, just data. From the back of the plane, Helen watched, eyes wide. That's her, she whispered to the man beside her. That's the woman they moved. The man shook his head slowly. Jesus. Alyssa tapped once, then twice. Her fingers moved with quiet authority, selecting options, confirming prompts that asked questions in precise language meant to protect against impulsive hands. She paused at the final screen. Agent Reed glanced at it. Once you confirm, the system will re-handshake with dispatch. Alyssa looked up. Before I do, she said. I want something else noted. Reed waited. The removal from my seat wasn't an operational error, Alyssa said. It was a discretionary decision made after my credentials were verified. I want that distinction recorded. Natalie's breath hitched. Reed nodded. I'll include it. Alyssa pressed confirm. The phone vibrated once, then stilled. A low hum began beneath the floor, subtle at first, like a distant animal waking. Screens flickered. The overhead lights steadied, brightening a shade. Cool air flowed from the vents with a fresh rush, clearing the stale tension that had settled over the cabin. The captain let out a breath he'd been holding. We're back online, he said, almost to himself. A ripple of sound followed. Relief, nervous laughter. Someone clapped again, softer this time. A man near the window wiped his palms on his pants. Agent Reed stepped back. Thank you, Ms. Grant, he said. We'll be concluding our on-board activity. He turned to Natalie. You'll be filing a statement. Natalie nodded, tears finally spilling over. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course. As the agents prepared to disembark, Natalie took a hesitant step toward Alyssa. Ms. Grant, she said, voice shaking. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I saw the clothes and I just assumed. Alyssa looked at her, expression unreadable. I'm not going to pursue termination, Alyssa said. Natalie sagged with relief. But you're not working first class for a long time. You'll swap with the attendant in the rear. You'll serve economy, every flight, until you understand what that assumption costs. Natalie nodded frantically. Thank you, she said. Thank you, go, Alyssa said. Natalie turned and hurried down the aisle, past the rows she'd walked with confidence earlier, past the eyes that now followed her with something closer to judgment. The door closed again. The rain muffled outside. The plane felt whole. Alyssa leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. The seat cradled her shoulders. The quiet returned. Different now. Earned. A man in 2B finally spoke. Excuse me, he said, voice smooth, controlled. Ms. Grant. Alyssa opened her eyes and turned. He smiled, friendly, practiced. Mid-40s, well-cut suit, no tie. The look of someone who understood rooms and how to work them. I just wanted to say, he continued, that took courage. Thank you, Alyssa said. I'm Mark, he said. Mark Harlan. She nodded once. Alyssa. Of course, he said, chuckling softly, as if amused by his own formality. Safe travels. He turned back to his seat, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved quickly now, tapping out a message he'd been composing in fragments since the engines died. The captain's voice came over the intercom, lighter, steadier. Ladies and gentlemen, The technical issue has been resolved. We've been cleared for immediate departure. Thank you for your patience. The engines roared to life, full and confident this time, vibrating through the cabin. The plane began to move. Alyssa watched the rain streak across the window as the aircraft taxied, the world sliding back into motion. She felt the familiar pull in her chest, the sense of being carried forward by something vast and indifferent, something she understood better than most. She didn't see Mark Harlan glance at her phone again, then slip it into his pocket, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. She didn't see the message already delivered, already read. Subject: Incident on Flight 482. Body. She used the system. We have our opening. The plane turned toward the runway. Alyssa exhaled, unaware that the turbulence ahead wouldn't come from the sky. The wheels left the ground with a heavy, committed thud. The city dropped away beneath a curtain of rain, Chicago flattening into grids and shadows as the aircraft climbed. The cabin settled into a fragile calm, the kind that feels earned but temporary, like quiet after a door slams somewhere else in the house. Seatbelt signs chimed, trays clicked open. People exhaled into the new normal as if the last hour had been a shared hallucination. Alyssa Grant did not sleep. She stared out the window, watching the clouds thicken, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She looked exactly the same as she had when she boarded. Hoodie, bare face, eyes alert. But something had shifted, not in her posture, in the air around her. She felt it the way sailors feel weather before it arrives. A flight attendant approached, younger, careful in her movements. "It's cool. Grant," she said quietly. "Can I get you anything?" "Sparkling water," Alyssa replied. "No ice." The attendant nodded and retreated. Across the aisle, Mark Harlan sat with his legs crossed, chin lowered as he scrolled. His expression was neutral, almost bored, but his fingers moved with purpose. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward Alyssa, then away, calibrating. He had the look of a man who never wasted a crisis. In the back, Helen settled her knitting and leaned back, finally closing her eyes. The tension had drained from her shoulders, replaced by the deep fatigue of someone who had witnessed something larger than herself and survived it. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Alyssa reached for her phone. Not the blue app, not yet. She opened her secure inbox. There it was, already waiting. Board notification. Priority. Her thumb hovered, then pressed. The message was short. Too short. Emergency session requested. Board of Directors. Immediate availability required. Subject: Operational Misconduct Review. She read it twice. Her jaw tightened. Just a fraction. Operational misconduct. That was the phrase you used when you wanted to sound clinical about a knife. She locked the screen and rested the phone on her thigh. The cabin noise faded into a dull wash as her mind began to move, fast and precise. Assembling timelines, faces, motivations. Someone had acted quickly. Someone had been ready. She thought of Mark Harlan's smile, of the way he'd spoken just enough, of the message she hadn't seen sent. The flight attendant returned with the water. Alyssa took it, nodded her thanks, then took a slow sip. Cold, clean, grounding. Her phone buzzed again. David Lynn this time. Calling. She answered. "Tell me," she said. David didn't waste breath. "The board just locked the admin override." Alyssa closed her eyes. "How?" she asked. "They invoked emergency protocol," David said. "Citing risk exposure. Said you used company assets for personal retaliation." Silence stretched. "That's absurd," Alyssa said. "The license agreement is explicit." "I know," David said. "They know. That's not the point." Alyssa looked around the cabin, at the passengers now absorbed in movies and meals, blissfully unaware of the quiet war unfolding above the Atlantic. "Who pushed it?" she asked. David hesitated. "Mark Harlan." There it was. Alyssa let out a breath through her nose. Slow, controlled. "He was on the flight," David continued. "He was already feeding them a narrative before we landed." "Of course he was," Alyssa said. "They're framing it as a pattern," David said. "Emotional decision-making. Founder risk." Alyssa almost smiled. "They're moving fast," David said. "I wanted you to hear it from me before the press does." "When?" she asked. David didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was tight. "They're preparing a statement." Alyssa opened her eyes. "David," she said, "I need you to listen carefully." "I am." "Do not touch the admin logs," she said. "Do not alter anything. Not even to protect me." "I wouldn't. I need everything intact," Alyssa continued. "If they're calling this misconduct, they'll have to prove intent. The logs prove policy compliance." David exhaled. "They're trying to get ahead of that." "Let them," Alyssa said. "We'll meet them where they are." A pause. "They're also suspending your access," David said quietly. "Effective immediately." Alyssa nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Okay," she said. "That's it?" David asked. "That's it," she replied. "For now." She ended the call. The phone felt heavier in her hand. Across the aisle, Mark Harlan stood, smoothing his jacket. He leaned toward her seat, the picture of courtesy. "Ms. Grant," he said softly, as if sharing a confidence. "May I?" Alyssa looked up at him. "You already are." He smiled. "I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable after everything earlier." "I'm fine," she said. "I'm glad," Mark said. "It was dramatic." "Was it?" Alyssa said. He chuckled. "You know how these things play. Perception matters." "It does," she agreed. Mark studied her, eyes sharp. "The board is concerned." "I imagine they are." "They worry about precedent," he continued. "Grounding a commercial flight is a serious lever." "So is stealing licensed property," Alyssa said. Mark's smile didn't falter. "True. But stories are rarely told from the code's perspective." Alyssa tilted her head slightly. "Is that a threat?" "No," Mark said easily. "An observation." He straightened. "Enjoy the rest of your flight." As he turned away, Alyssa spoke. "Mark." He paused. "You were very quiet earlier," she said. "Until you weren't." Mark met her gaze, something colder flickering beneath the charm. I believe in timing. So do I, Alyssa said. He nodded once and returned to his seat. The plane pushed deeper into cloud, the outside world erased to white. Alyssa stared ahead, her mind already shifting gears, mapping moves and counter-moves. She had built Aegis systems from nothing, from nights without sleep and meetings where she'd been mistaken for an assistant, from contracts written to protect systems from exactly this kind of human interference. They thought they'd found leverage. They thought wrong. Her phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. She let it ring, then answered. Alyssa Grant, she said. The voice on the other end was polished, rehearsed. Ms. Grant, this is corporate communications. We're preparing a release regarding today's incident. We'd like your statement. Alyssa looked out the window at the endless white. You can quote me, she said. There was a pause. Go ahead. This wasn't about a seat, Alyssa said. It was about whether systems apply to everyone or only to those who think they're above them. Another pause. And, she added, if the board believes accountability is misconduct, they should prepare to explain that position publicly. Silence. I'll send that in writing, the voice said. Alyssa ended the call. The plane cruised on, steady and indifferent. Somewhere far below, pieces were already moving. The wheels touched down in London with a jolt that rattled the cabin, but failed to break the tension clinging to Alyssa's chest. Applause scattered, thin and reflexive. The seatbelt sign chimed. People surged into the aisle, eager to reclaim movement, normalcy, their phones already glowing with messages they'd missed. Alyssa stayed seated until the aisle cleared, watching condensation slide down the window as grey morning light crept in over Heathrow. The city waited. So did the reckoning. Her phone came alive the moment the aircraft slowed to taxi speed. 3 missed calls. 12 messages. 1 notification that sat heavier than the rest. Access restricted. She tapped it. The screen hesitated, then loaded a sterile notice. Your credentials have been temporarily suspended pending review. Alyssa stared at the words until they lost meaning. Temporarily. Pending review. The language of polite erasure. A flight attendant stopped beside her, voice cautious now, respectful in a way that hadn't existed hours earlier. Ms. Grant, we'll be disembarking shortly. There's a car waiting for you plainside. Alyssa looked up. I didn't request one. Yes, the attendant said. But they did. The door opened. Cool air rushed in, damp and sharp. Alyssa stepped onto the jet bridge and immediately saw it. A black sedan idling on the tarmac. 2 men in dark coats, professional, alert, and Lydia Chen. Lydia stood beside the car, posture rigid, arms folded tight against herself. Early 40s, impeccably dressed as always, but her face betrayed her. The warmth Alyssa knew so well was gone, replaced by something strained, almost apologetic. Alyssa stopped. Lydia, she said. What's going on? Lydia didn't smile. She opened the car door. Get in, she said quietly. We're not going to the hotel. Alyssa hesitated. The tarmac stretched woodland empty around them, rain misting the air. Somewhere behind her, passengers filed off the plane, unaware they were leaving a story still in motion. "My meeting with regulators isn't until tomorrow," Alyssa said. "I know," Lydia replied. "The board called an emergency session. They're all there, physically or virtually." Alyssa's pulse quickened. "About what?" Lydia met her eyes. For a second, the mask cracked. "About you." The car pulled away from the runway, slipping into London traffic with practiced ease. The city blurred past the windows, grey and wet and unfamiliar. Alyssa checked her phone again. Email wouldn't load. Messaging apps spun endlessly before timing out. Even her secure channels refused to connect. "They cut me off," Alyssa said. Lydia nodded. 5 minutes after we landed. Who moved first? Lydia didn't answer immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead. "Mark Harlan has been preparing for this for a long time." Alyssa leaned back. "He was waiting." "Yes." "And Richard Coleman?" Alyssa asked. Lydia's mouth tightened. Mark knew him. Golfed with him. Used him. The words settled like ash. "So the seat," Alyssa said slowly, "was bait." Lydia's silence was confirmation enough. They pulled up to Aegis Systems' London headquarters, a glass and steel tower that caught the dull sky and reflected it back, cold and impenetrable. The lobby was too quiet. Employees stood in clusters, whispering, their conversations dying as Alyssa passed. No one met her eyes. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors opened, the conference room was already full. Screens lined the walls, faces of board members staring out from across oceans. At the head of the table sat Charles Whitman, chairman of the board, hands folded, expression grave. And beside him, impossibly composed, sat Mark Harlan. He looked rested. Alyssa stopped just inside the doorway. Mark smiled. "Alyssa, you made it." She didn't return it. "You moved quickly." "We had to," Charles said, voice heavy. "The situation demanded it." "What situation?" Alyssa asked. "A passenger committing theft, or a system working exactly as designed?" Mark leaned back. "Let's not pretend this was purely technical." Alyssa stepped forward, placing her hands flat on the table. "I enforced policy." "You grounded a commercial aircraft," Mark replied. "For personal reasons. For contractual reasons," Alyssa shot back. "The license is clear." Charles raised a hand. "This isn't about legality alone. It's about judgment." Alyssa laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You're questioning my judgment?" "Yes," Mark said calmly. "We are." He tapped a tablet. The screen behind him flickered to life, headlines scrolling past. "CEO, grounds plane, over seat dispute. Founder meltdown delays international flight." Alyssa felt a chill. "That's a lie." "It's a narrative," Mark said. "And narratives move markets. Markets will move when the truth comes out." Mark's smile thinned. "We control the channels." Charles slid a document across the table. "This is a motion of no confidence. Effective immediately. You're placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Your executive powers are suspended." Alyssa stared at the paper. You can't do this. We already did, Charles said. Alyssa looked around the room, at faces she'd trusted, people she'd built with. I own 40% of this company, and the rest of us own 60, Charles replied. The vote passed while you were en route. Alyssa turned to Lydia. You knew. Lydia's voice shook. They threatened to cut my pension, my visa. I abstained. Alyssa closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Mark stood, walking toward her, lowering his voice. You should have let it go, Alyssa. 1 seat. That's all. You set me up, she said. Yes, he admitted softly. And you took the bait. Charles cleared his throat. Security will escort you out. You're not to contact employees or press. Any violation of the NDA will be met with legal action. Alyssa straightened. You think this ends me? She said quietly. Mark tilted his head. We think it contains you. Alyssa smiled then. Slow. Cold. You understand the interface, she said. Not the system. Mark chuckled. Is that a threat? It's a diagnosis, Alyssa replied. She turned and walked out, the glass doors sealing shut behind her. In a small boutique hotel miles away, Alyssa sat alone on the edge of a bed, the city humming beyond the window. Her phone lay useless beside her. Email dead, accounts frozen. Her name already twisting through headlines she hadn't written. For the first time that day, doubt crept in. Had she miscalculated? Her burner phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the name. Helen. She answered. You might want to check TikTok, Helen said, voice breathless. Honey, you're everywhere. Alyssa frowned. What do you mean? Someone filmed the whole thing, Helen said. Not just the argument. Everything. Alyssa's heart skipped. The system wasn't finished yet. It was just getting started. Alyssa downloaded the app with hands that refused to shake. The hotel room was small, clean, anonymous. A single lamp cast a warm cone of light over the bed. Outside, London traffic hissed through wet streets. The burner phone buzzed again as the app finished installing, the screen already flooding with motion before she touched anything. Her face, not posed, not curated. Standing in the aisle of an airplane, hoodie pulled low, voice calm as glass. The video autoplayed. Excuse me, sir. I believe you're in my seat. Richard Coleman's laugh followed, crisp and dismissive. Economy is that way. Alyssa felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain. Recognition. The caption scrolled beneath the footage. The CEO didn't snap. She was pushed. The view count climbed in real time, numbers ticking upward so fast they blurred. Hundreds of thousands. Millions. Comments poured in like a storm, stacking faster than she could read. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She just asked for what she paid for. This is profiling, plain and simple. That guy in the suit is disgusting. Why did the flight attendant side with him when the boarding pass was right there? Alyssa sat back against the headboard, phone heavy in her hand. Her breath slowed as the first wave of shock passed. The world was seeing what she'd lived, not filtered through a press release, not sanitized by corporate language, raw, uncomfortable, human. Then the video cut. The second clip loaded. Different angle. Zoomed. Grainier. Filmed from behind a magazine. The gap between first-class seats 1 and 2 filled the frame. Richard leaned toward the man beside him, voice low, smug. "That was easier than you said, Mark," Richard whispered. She walked right to the back. The man in 2B chuckled. Mark Harlan's voice, unmistakable now. "Give it 10 minutes. She'll flip the switch. She can't help herself." Richard clinked his glass against Mark's. "And the board?" "Already lined up," Mark said. "As soon as she grounds the flight, we move. Cause clause. Clean exit." Alyssa's breath caught. "Your SEC problem?" Mark continued. "Handled. They'll say it was a coincidence. You just need to look offended." Richard laughed. To the end of the Alyssa Grant era. The glass clinked again. The video ended. The room felt suddenly too small. Alyssa lowered the phone slowly, her pulse loud in her ears. Her mind raced, replaying every moment on the plane, every look, every word. It hadn't been chaos, it had been choreography. Her burner phone lit up with a call. Unknown. She answered. "I'm so sorry," a young woman's voice said, rushing, breathless. "I didn't know how bad it was until I saw the news. I couldn't let them lie." Alyssa closed her eyes. "You filmed it?" "Yes," the woman said. "I'm Sophie. I was in 2A. I travel a lot. I've seen this kind of thing before. But when they said you had a breakdown, that wasn't true." "No," Alyssa said quietly. "It wasn't. I have the raw files," Sophie continued. "Uncompressed. Timestamps. Everything." Alyssa sat up. "Where are you?" "London," Sophie said. "Same hotel they put most of us in. I'm 10 minutes away if you want to talk." "I do," Alyssa said. "Please." She ended the call and stood, pacing the length of the room once, twice. The doubt that had crept in earlier evaporated, burned away by something colder and sharper. Clarity. They hadn't beaten her, they'd exposed themselves. The knock came sooner than she expected. Sophie stood in the doorway, pink hair pulled into a messy knot, eyes bright with adrenaline. A heavy laptop bag hung from her shoulder. Behind her was a tall man with a camera case slung across his back. "I hope it's okay," Sophie said. "This is my brother, Ethan. He edits documentaries. I thought you might need help." Alyssa stepped aside. "Come in." They set up quickly, laptop on the desk, camera on a small tripod. A ring light borrowed from Sophie's travel kit clicked on, bathing the room in clean white light. Ethan glanced at Alyssa. "Do you want this polished or raw?" Alyssa considered the question, thought of boardrooms and spin and language designed to blur responsibility. "Raw," she said. "Truth doesn't need makeup." Sophie nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard. "We're already trending," she said. Hashtag Seat1. A is everywhere. Alyssa took a breath and sat in the chair facing the camera. Hoodie still on, hair still pulled back. She didn't change a thing. Whenever you're ready, Ethan said. Alyssa leaned forward slightly, eyes steady on the lens. My name is Alyssa Grant, she said, and I'd like to introduce you to the man who stole my seat and the man who paid him to do it. The words landed cleanly. She spoke slowly, deliberately, laying out the timeline without embellishment. The boarding pass, the dismissal, the forced move, the system response. She explained the license in plain language, translating code into consequences. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for sympathy. She played the clip. The room filled with Mark Harlan's voice, smooth and damning. When it ended, Alyssa looked back at the camera. They said I grounded a plane over a chair, she said. What I did was enforce a system designed to protect all of us from people who think rules don't apply to them. If that scares my board, it should. She sat back. Ethan exhaled softly. That'll do it. They uploaded the video. The response was immediate. Viewers surged into the live stream, numbers climbing so fast Sophie laughed in disbelief. Comments exploded across the screen, scrolling faster than they could read. He set her up. This isn't just discrimination. It's corporate sabotage. Bring her back. Fire the board. Alyssa's burner phone buzzed again. David Lynn, this time, voice tight with urgency. They're panicking, he said. Stocks dropping. 20% and falling. The dev team just locked the server room. No one's deleting anything. Alyssa closed her eyes, emotion rising at the edges now. Thank you, she said. Hold the line. Another call came through. Lydia. They're shredding documents, Lydia whispered. Payment records. Travel reimbursements. I'm calling the police. They can't erase the internet, Alyssa said. You're doing the right thing. When the line went dead, Alyssa stood and walked to the window. The rain streaked down the glass. London blurred beyond it. She thought of Seat 1A, of how small it had seemed, and how enormous it had become. Sophie glanced up from the laptop. What now? Alyssa turned back, resolve settling over her like armor. Now, she said, we let the system do what it's supposed to do. The live viewer count crossed another milestone. Somewhere across the city, phones rang without pause. Boardrooms filled with noise and fear, and the story they'd tried to bury rose, unstoppable, carried by millions of eyes that had finally learned where to look. The boardroom at Aegis Systems did not sleep that night. Phones rang without pause, a shrill, overlapping chorus that shredded any illusion of control. Tablets lit up, refreshed, lit up again. The stock ticker bled red, numbers cascading downward, as if gravity itself had turned against them. Charles Whitman sat slumped at the head of the table, jacket off now, tie loosened, staring at the wall-sized screen that no longer showed market data, but Alyssa's face calm and unflinching, speaking directly into millions of homes. Mark Harlan paced. His shoes whispered across the polished floor, back and forth, back and forth. He kept checking his phone, typing furiously, deleting, typing again. Every message he sent seemed to come back with worse news than the last. "Tell me it's stabilizing," he snapped at no one in particular. A junior analyst swallowed hard. "It's not. We crossed a 20% drop an hour ago." Charles closed his eyes. 20%. The number echoed like a bell. That threshold mattered. It wasn't symbolic. It was written. Contractual. A line Alyssa herself had insisted on years ago, back when she'd still been arguing for safeguards instead of survival. "Get legal," Mark said. "Get PR. We need a counter-narrative." The head of communications shook her head slowly. "They won't touch it. Not after the audio." "What do you mean they won't touch it?" Mark snapped. "They resigned," she said. "All of them. They said they're not going to jail for this." The words landed hard. Mark stopped pacing. "That's not how this works." "It is now," she replied. An assistant burst into the room, breathless. "You need to see the lobby." Charles and Mark moved to the glass wall overlooking the plaza below. What they saw made Charles grip the edge of the table to stay upright. People. Hundreds at first glance, then thousands. Signs already raised despite the rain. Phones held high, screens glowing like a field of watchful eyes. Bring back Alyssa. Seat 1. A was never the issue. Arrest Harlan. Mark scoffed, but his voice shook. "It's just a mob." "Markets care about mobs," Charles said hoarsely, "especially when they're right." Mark turned back to the table. "We halt trading." "We can't," Charles said. "The SEC flagged us. DOJ too. We're radioactive." The screen flickered again, switching feeds. Alyssa now sat on a hotel bed, laptop open, Sophie beside her, the live stream banner pulsing at the bottom. Viewer count climbing by the tens of thousands every minute. Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then went pale. "What?" Charles demanded. Mark swallowed. "My bank froze my accounts." Charles stared at him. "What?" "Preliminary action," Mark said, forcing a laugh that came out wrong. "Just procedure." The laughter died quickly. Across the city, Alyssa watched the comments scroll, her mind operating on a different plane entirely. The outrage mattered, yes. The exposure mattered. But emotion alone didn't rebuild systems. Structure did. Sophie looked up from her screen. "News networks want interviews. All of them. Tell them I'll speak after the board resigns," Alyssa said calmly. Her burner phone rang again. "David." "They tried to lock us out," he said, voice buzzing with adrenaline. "Security showed up with orders from Harlan to wipe admin logs." "And?" Alyssa asked. "We barricaded the server room," David said. "Moved vending machines. The whole dev team's here. Sitting on the floor, no one's getting in." Alyssa closed her eyes, feeling something warm rise in her chest. Not relief. Gratitude. "Hold," she said. "No matter what. We will, David replied. This company is you. They just forgot that. The call ended. Alyssa turned to Sophie. I need the bylaws. Sophie was already typing. Article 15, Section 4, she said after a beat. In the event of catastrophic shareholder value loss exceeding 20% within 24 hours, any shareholder holding more than 5% equity may call an emergency general meeting to dissolve the sitting board. Alyssa nodded. I hold 40. Sophie looked up, eyes wide. So you can? Yes, Alyssa said. Tomorrow morning. The live stream chat exploded when she said it out loud. Emergency meeting. Vote them out. We'll be there. Alyssa stood, pulling on her coat. The hoodie stayed. It had become something else now. A reminder. A signal. Tomorrow, she said into the camera, we vote. The feed cut. Morning came grey and relentless. The ballroom of the Intercontinental filled early, shareholders streaming in, reporters lining the walls, cameras perched like birds of prey. Security stood rigid, eyes scanning faces, the air buzzing with anticipation and fury. On one side of the stage sat what remained of the board. Charles Whitman looked smaller than he had the night before, shoulders hunched, hands trembling. Mark Harlan sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting. The moderator cleared his throat. We'll begin. Charles stood first. His voice wavered. We acted to protect stability. Ms. Grant's behavior was volatile. To ground a plane over a seat, the crowd erupted. Booing drowned him out, raw and relentless. He sat down, defeated before he could finish. Mark surged to his feet, seizing the microphone. His confidence flared, brittle but loud. You don't understand how business works. This is war. I protected your dividends. She's a liability. A hush fell as the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Alyssa walked in. She wasn't wearing the hoodie now. A white suit cut sharp lines against the gloom, clean and deliberate. The crowd parted instinctively, eyes following her as she moved down the aisle, flanked by Lydia, David, and Natalie, who looked taller than she had ever looked, but resolute. Alyssa stepped onto the stage and faced the room. Mr. Harlan asks if I care about dividends, she said, voice amplified, steady. I built this company from a basement. I wrote the code that navigates nearly half the world's air traffic. I know the value of $1, and I know the cost of silence. She gestured to Natalie. This woman moved me to the back of a plane because she was afraid of men like Mark, afraid of losing her job. Yesterday, the board tried to do the same to me. She turned to Mark. But I don't fit in the exit row anymore. She looked at the screen behind her. Vote. The tally appeared instantly. Remove the board. 88%. The room exploded. Mark staggered back, disbelief etched across his face. This is illegal, he shouted. I have friends. He didn't finish. 2 officers stepped onto the stage, followed by a federal agent. Mark Harlan, one said, you are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and corporate espionage. As they cuffed him, Mark's eyes found Alyssa's. Rage. Then fear. You think you won? He spat. Alyssa met his gaze, unflinching. "No," she said. "I fixed the system." Charles sank into his chair as he was led away, hands shaking, face grey. Alyssa turned back to the crowd. "Thank you," she said simply. The applause thundered, a sound that felt less like celebration and more like release. Somewhere in the city, servers hummed back to life. Planes moved, systems aligned. Seat 1. A had never been just a seat. It had been a test, and the system, this time, had held. 1 year later, the Pacific was calm beneath the wings. The Gulf Stream cut through the air without turbulence. The horizon washed in gold as the sun slid toward evening. The cabin was quiet in the way only private aircraft ever were, insulated from urgency, from noise, from people who needed to be reminded to sit down. Alyssa Grant sat in seat 1A, not because it was symbolic, not because anyone was watching, but because it was the safest place to think. She turned a page of the magazine resting lightly in her hands. Forbes. The paper smelled faintly of ink and polish. Her face stared back at her from the cover, composed, unsmiling, eyes steady. The headline beneath it read, "The Architecture of Accountability: How Alyssa Grant Rewired Power." She closed the magazine without reading the article. She already knew the story they told. What interested her more was what they'd missed. Across the aisle, Lydia Chen sipped champagne, her posture finally relaxed in a way it hadn't been for years. Chief Operating Officer looked good on her. It fit. She'd grown into the role the way some people grow into truth, slowly at first, then all at once. "Did you see the sentencing?" Lydia asked, swirling the glass. Alyssa didn't look up. "No." "Mark Harlan," Lydia continued. 10 years, no parole. Federal facility." Alyssa nodded once. "And Charles Whitman took a plea," Lydia added. "Cooperated. Lost everything. Reputation, board seats, access. Silence stretched comfortably between them. "What about Richard Coleman?" Alyssa asked. Lydia smiled, sharp and satisfied. 3 years, wire fraud, plus restitution. $12 million for the flight delay alone. "He's bankrupt." Alyssa absorbed that without visible reaction. She'd learned long ago that consequences didn't need witnesses to be real. The plane banked slightly. Light shifted across the cabin, catching on polished wood and brushed metal. Everything in here was designed for comfort, for control. Alyssa had learned to appreciate that without confusing it for power. Power was quieter. Her phone vibrated softly. She glanced at the screen. Tiffany. She hadn't heard from her in months. Alyssa opened the message. "Passed my solo flight today. First time alone in the air. Thank you for the second chance." Alyssa's mouth curved into the smallest smile. She typed back, "Congratulations, Captain. The sky is yours." She set the phone aside and leaned back, letting the hum of the engines settle into her bones. Aegis systems had changed in the last year, not just structurally, culturally. The Moore Protocol was now industry standard, baked into every licensing agreement. Any unauthorized manifest change triggered an automatic review. No discretion, no hierarchy, just data and consequence. Airlines complained at first. Boards resisted. Regulators hesitated. Then the numbers spoke. Incidents dropped. Lawsuits evaporated. Trust returned. The system worked because it didn't care who you were. Alyssa closed her eyes briefly, remembering the weight of 34B, the scratch of the fabric, the way the armrest had pressed too hard into her side, the way she'd been made small in a space she'd paid to occupy. She didn't feel anger anymore. She felt something better. Resolution. Lydia glanced at her. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. That day, Alyssa opened her eyes. "Not the way people think." "Which way is that?" "They think it was about humiliation," Alyssa said, "or revenge, or ego." "And it wasn't? It was about integrity," Alyssa replied. "A system either applies to everyone, or it's a lie." The plane began its descent toward San Francisco, the coastline emerging from cloud like a promise kept. Alyssa watched the water catch the last light of day, vast and indifferent. She thought of all the people who'd messaged her since, the engineers who'd said they stayed because of what she did, the students who'd said they stopped shrinking themselves in rooms where they belonged, the strangers who'd said they started reading contracts more carefully. Seat 1 had been a catalyst, not a throne. As the wheels touched down smoothly, Alyssa felt the quiet certainty settle in her chest. There would be other challenges, other men who mistook confidence for entitlement, other systems that needed to be rebuilt from the inside out. She welcomed them. The plane slowed to a stop. The door opened. Cool evening air spilled in. Alyssa picked up her duffel bag, the same one she'd carried through Chicago in the rain, and stood. She walked down the stairs without ceremony, already thinking about the next meeting, the next design review, the next line of code that would decide whether the world bent toward fairness or away from it. Because she hadn't just gotten her seat back, she'd made sure no one would ever have to ask if they deserved one again. The car waited at the edge of the tarmac, engine idling, door already open. Alyssa Grant paused at the bottom of the stairs, breathing in the cool California air. The sky was clear, streaked with fading orange and violet, the kind of sunset people photographed and forgot. For her, it felt like punctuation, not an ending, a period placed exactly where it belonged. She slid into the back seat. The door closed with a soft, final click. As the car pulled away, her phone buzzed again. Not a headline, not a board alert, just a calendar reminder she'd set months ago and never cancelled. Design review. Autonomous compliance layer. 8 a.m. She smiled faintly. The system was alive now in ways no hostile board could touch. Distributed. Redundant. Protected not by titles, but by people who believed in what it stood for. Engineers who had locked doors with vending machines. Employees who had walked out of meetings instead of swallowing lies. Passengers who had lifted their phones when silence would have been easier. Alyssa rested her head briefly against the window as the city lights came into view. San Francisco rolled past, familiar and changed, like everything worth keeping. She thought about power, The kind she'd once been told to imitate, loud, performative, demanding recognition. She'd tried it early in her career and hated how it felt, like wearing someone else's coat. Too heavy, too false. Real power, she'd learned, was quieter. It sat in contracts no one read, in systems that refused to bend for convenience, in moments where you chose consistency over comfort, knowing you might stand alone for a while. She thought of Natalie, now thriving in economy cabins, learning empathy at 30,000 feet. Of Tiffany's text, the pride trembling through every word. Of Helen's steady hand squeezing hers in row 34. Proof that witnesses mattered. The car slowed at a red light. Alyssa caught her reflection in the glass. Same hoodie folded neatly beside her. Same duffel bag at her feet. Same woman. Different world. The light turned green. Tomorrow she'd be back in meetings, back in code reviews, back in the quiet grind of making systems fairer than the people who used them. There would be pushback. There always was. But now the cost of arrogance was built into the architecture itself. Seat 1. A would always exist. Someone would always want it. The difference now was that no one could take it by snapping their fingers. The car merged onto the freeway, the city unfolding ahead, vast and imperfect, and worth the work. If this story moved you, tap like so it reaches the people who need it. Subscribe if you want more stories where power gets rewritten from the inside. And if you've ever been underestimated, drop a comment with 3 words. Know your worth.